Hello and welcome everybody to the Pokerfuse podcast. It is March 11th, 2020. This is episode number 45. I'm your host, Mike Gentili, along with my co-host, Nick Jones. Today on the podcast, COVID-19, also known as the coronavirus, is spreading globally. We take a look at some of the live poker events that have been canceled as a result and others that are on our radar for possible future cancellation. Parent companies of the two biggest online poker operators in the world have released their financial reports for 2019. We take a look at how poker performed at PokerStars and partypoker. And finally, the second annual Global Poker Awards were handed out last week and we were in attendance. We highlight some of the winners and categories and discuss our experience in Las Vegas. The news that is taking center stage in the poker world and the rest of the world, as a matter of fact, is the spread of the coronavirus, also known as COVID-19. We've seen some poker operators cancel live events. Nick, what can you tell us about that?
Yeah, so by the time this goes out, the picture may well have changed again. So at the time of talking on Wednesday, we're still kind of collating all the announcements that we've had. We're so far at over 20 live poker events have been cancelled, rescheduled, or postponed over the next 2 months. It's almost at this point everything over the next month has been affected in some way. It includes some pretty big events from PokerStars, partypoker, WPT, Winamax, all kind of reacting to the spread of the virus.
Yeah, I guess it's prudent to do so at this point. I find it hard to imagine that things are going to get better anytime soon. So it looks like the events that have been canceled so far are ones that are in the more immediate future, but that leaves the question of some of the bigger tournaments that are just a little bit farther down the road, such as the WSOP and the PSPC. WSOP set to kick off end of May and run June through mid-July, and then we have the PSPC in August.
Yeah, and it's, operators have very tricky decisions on their hand, as do any organisers of any large event. The ones that we've seen cancelled over the next month or two, some of them are basically forced by federal government decisions to ban any large gatherings or large conferences. So particularly, Italy has just announced a complete lockdown of all their cities. So it was, it's impossible to run, any events. And I think so the Italian Poker Open had an event, I think next month or later this month. And the People's Poker also had an event in Italy. So those two have been cancelled. And that's almost just a reaction, if anything, just to, it's been forced. Similar situation in Spain. PokerStars has cancelled the next 3 Road to PSPC events. One's in Spain, one in France, and one in Germany. Some of those are a bit more proactive, so the situation's not so bad in Germany right now, and I guess that event in theory could have gone ahead. I actually think that should have started now, potentially. So that might be a very late cancellation. And then, events in Asia had already been cancelled. Some had already been cancelled, weeks ago. WPT has officially cancelled or postponed their stops in Vietnam, Taiwan. There's kind of no chance these were going to go ahead. And some of these announcements came quite late. Some of the bigger ones, Winamax has had to postpone their grand final, again in Madrid, so not really a decision there. And that's kind of easy ones to make. The Irish Poker Open is a pretty big deal. In theory, I guess that could have gone ahead. As you say, these are somewhat kind of straightforward ones to cancel. The big question is where we're going to be in a couple of months. And you see really no suggestions, predictions that this situation is going to be resolved or improved in 2 or 3 months' time. And so operators have got some really big questions still to answer.
Yeah, one notable one that was not canceled is PokerStars' stop in Sochi. Interesting that that was left off the cancellation list. I'm not entirely sure why. It could be due to the prevalence of the virus in that area. I'm not entirely sure.
Yeah, so Russia seems to be fairly... seems not to have suffered as much as mainland Europe. Obviously, there's a lot less travel in and out of it. And maybe, with these Sochi events, maybe there's a contractual obligation to continue these. Most of the participants will be Russian players, so internal travel is still pretty unrestricted, I would guess. But you're right. So the Party Poker Sochi event is currently going on or just completed, PokerStars EPT Sochi is still going ahead. Also, PokerStars BSOP events in Sao Paulo, that's still going ahead, and they also have one in Manila, which is also going ahead. I suppose that's a bit more surprising because I know there's some heavy travel restrictions in the Philippines. PokerStars said for those 3 events, they are going ahead. They've taken extra precautions with the operators in those countries. And again, I guess their feel is that it's mostly people in those cities or in the country at least who are planning to attend. I mean, with that said, we're seeing worldwide restrictions on any gatherings of large people, conferences, and obviously a poker tournament with chips passing round. It is kind of right at the front line for the kind of events that you would expect to see cancelled or postponed.
Yeah, I mean, there's traditionally already concerns about passing of germs at the poker table, cards, chips, whatnot. People are always commenting about how people don't wash their hands enough before returning to the poker table. So take that situation and then inject this COVID-19, and it really makes for a difficult situation for operators, for players, and I don't see things getting a whole lot better, to be quite honest. I'm not sure what could happen to make this situation more palatable down the road. For example, to allow people to not worry about attending some of these bigger events that are scheduled a little bit later on the calendar. So it is potentially possible that we do see additional cancellations. Yet it seems like I think, it was maybe about a week ago now that WSOP came out and said, hey, no, there's no plans at this point to cancel. So there's still hope that these events might take place.
Yeah, and there's multiple factors when an operator has to consider whether they cancel the event. One is, just required to, or it's just, ethically questionable whether you should allow such things to go ahead. The other is, even if you feel like, if players want the opportunity, local players in their city, to go out and play, you could keep running it. But if you think turnout is going to be very low, then you're going to either miss guarantees. And some of the first news that we saw were just operators removing guarantees from events. So we first saw that at WPT Barcelona. I think a week ago, they removed the guarantees, expecting obviously a lower turnout. That event has now been cancelled. But also just staff, we've heard rumours of operators, we're seeing it in big companies as well, telling people to work from home or, restrict their personal travel. And, when operators run these events, they send a lot of staff out to these places. We're hearing that some poker companies are putting restrictions in place for their own staff going out there. And so that's obviously going to look, bad if your own staff are not allowed to go, but they're still allowing players to go. So there's all these factors to consider. And with the WSOP, I think a week or two ago, in an interview, I think Seth Polanski said that they had no current plans. The situation has escalated significantly in the United States in the last few days. I don't think there's been any statement yet. That the PR is still there, but it's funny. I think a week or two ago, I think some on the betting markets, on poker shares and on Twitter, people were looking at like getting 12-1 on the WSOP cancelling. I mean, I think everything you're hearing now is like it's even money at best whether it'll go ahead.
Yeah, one of the things that they do have going for them, as you had mentioned before about guarantees, is the WSOP doesn't have any guarantees. So they don't have to worry about losing money in that regard. It's mostly just an attendance thing. And is it, going to meet their their overhead, basically. And that should be doable. They also, this year, increased the number of online bracelet events. So that would also be something that I would expect should be able to go ahead. Contrast that against something like the PSPC, where they have a huge, 10 million guaranteed?
Well, they don't have a guarantee, but they're committed to giving away $10 million worth of platinum passes, and they've given away half of them. So, this is a huge, and the PSPC is perhaps the most interesting one. And, it's far enough out. We're talking August. So I'm guessing it's going to be crossing their fingers and hoping it still go ahead. They're still giving away platinum passes. They're still promoting it as much as before, but really unfortunate position for them, because this is the point they'd really start ramping up, giving away more, all the live events, all the Road to PSPC events they got coming up, giving away a bunch online. I think we talked last podcast about, still 10 a week that they need to give away. And then this happens, and it, what the contingency plan would be with all these platinum passes out there. I mean, I'm guessing put pause and reschedule for 6 months or a year.
Yeah. I don't think that's out of the question. I mean, they do have money, I would assume, that has been output contractual obligations with the casino, hotels, flights, and such. But considering the magnitude of this issue, that might be small potatoes.
And this is the thing with casinos and with the WSOP. I mean, if they're saying, if they cancel the WSOP, that has huge ramifications for the casino business as a whole. I mean, what signal does that send? That they can't, if you can't have large gatherings in casinos, I mean, that's not just the WSOP, that's just day-to-day business, right? That is what they do, is they gather lots of people in one room to share chips and gamble and drink and dine together. That's what casinos are. So, but, that has to be the decision that might have to be made.
On the positive side, we did see at the onset of this outbreak, we did see Macau close down their casinos, but then they did reopen. And I believe they are currently open and running right now. So perhaps there's hope that this can get past the initial wave, and maybe there's enough mitigating plans to be put in place to be able to let this go forward. Last week on this podcast, we talked about some financial numbers, positive financial numbers from Unibet. We have since seen financial reporting from the two of the biggest online poker operators in the Stars Group, parent company of PokerStars, and GVC, parent company of Party Poker. Nick, how do those company financials shake out?
So starting with PokerStars, by far the largest operator. No real way to state it other than, it's a very tough year, disappointing year for PokerStars in terms of their revenue from online poker. It's, since 2016, they had fractional growth into 2017 and again into 2018. And in fact, 2018 was their largest in 4 or 5 years, a couple of percentage points growth. 2019 reversed all that. So annual revenue was down around 12%, slightly less in terms of constant currency, but still a pretty sizable chunk of decline. This is like diluted now in the much larger company revenue. So poker is less than a third of company revenue due to all their acquisitions of UK Sky Betting and Gaming, and less so like the Australia businesses. But with that and the growing casino and sports, poker takes a kind of step back. But when you just look at those numbers, poker was certainly disappointing in 2019.
What did they point to explain some of the decline that they saw in 2019? Usually they will highlight some factors that they want to convey to investors on as to the reason why things either go up or down. Yeah,
so it's 100% disrupted markets. I would say that less time is spent discussing online poker specifically than a year or two ago when it was 70% plus of the business. I also say they're not doing investors calls at the moment as the merger with Flutter is pending, so they put pause to that. But the slides and press release dedicated to this section, it's kind of 100% the markets that they had to withdraw from or operating is trickier in. And we would have, it's the same. It was the same story throughout the year from Q1 through to Q4. The same 10 to 12% decline every quarter, and each time it was blamed on the same thing. So withdrawing from Slovakia a year ago, withdrawing from Switzerland 6 months ago, fewer payment processing options in the Netherlands, in Norway, apps being removed from the odd app stores. So it's ultimately, and when they say disrupted markets, it's basically grey markets or unlicensed or unregulated markets. They argue that in their kind of regulated markets, which is the growing part of the business, revenues were flat to slightly growing.
Was there any mention of Russia? That's been a big topic of discussion when they released their financials recently, and I was just wondering what the execs over at the Stars Group had to say about Russia.
Yeah, so no mention of Russia in their Q4s, or I think even their Q3s. It wasn't until the first period of last year when they were really highlighted that as their major issue. With that said, I still think it's there. I still think it's a large part of the disruption they're facing. They're still lapping some additional enforcement and difficulty operating with payment processing. With that said, they did release this dedicated Russian client, and maybe that's proving a success, that model, that method that they're using to continue operating in the country. So they say made no note of it, but again, details were very few and far between. I think other than literally mentioning maybe Sweden, Switzerland, and Slovakia, there was no other kind of exploration of the topic.
Are they on track for the merger/acquisition with Flutter?
Yeah, I think so. I think it's still pending internal kind of due diligence and exploration, and then there's competition and marketing authority investigations. I think it was temporarily approved or pending approval in Australia. There was positive news out of there. I don't think it's even been triggered in the UK yet, or that might have just started. So it's still I think it's still 6 months out. But that is still going ahead for all intents and purposes.
Okay, and what about GVC, Party Poker parent company? How did the poker results come out from GVC?
Yeah, so they had a better year. They reported that their revenue grew 8% in 2019, year over year, which, against the backdrop of the largest poker market leader by a long shot declining so much more, that's very positive. Inside those numbers, it's not quite as impressive, perhaps. Their poker has been growing every year since 2015, and the prior 2 years have been growing more like 30 or 40%. So 8% is significantly down on the growth that they've seen before. They reported after the first half of last year that growth was like 12%. So that means the back half of the year, their growth was much less. We estimate it more like 2.5% to 3%, something like that. So there's definitely a slowdown. They kind of talked about that in Q3. I think we probably talked about it on the podcast they said explicitly to investors their effort to catch bots resulted in revenue being a slowdown, they called it, in Q3. They'd hoped that would perform better in Q4. We think that slowdown probably extended into Q4. They were lapping a very good fourth quarter in the year prior. But with all that said, despite all these things, and again, it's interesting, the headwinds we just discussed about PokerStars, that affects all businesses. Party Poker operates in Russia, they're online poker. And they had to withdraw from Switzerland and Slovakia, and it painted much with the kind of same brush, same impact there. So the fact that they still grew 8%, they will certainly welcome, and we've certainly seen in 2020 investment hasn't ceased in any way with all their insane leaderboard promotions and more millions online and new live tours. So they are doing everything they can, I think, to keep that growth continuing into 2020.
Yeah, they're continuing to update their client. We saw the mobile client recently revamped. They're doing a lot of things to try and court players. Did they point to anything in the financials to attribute their growth to?
I mean, not really. And again, poker often doesn't get much for looking at all in investors, on the investors call in the press release. Their full year one in particular, there wasn't really much discussion. So just trying to look here. I mean, there was literally one statement They pointed to the rollout of the new mobile app. That's expected to, quote, strengthen acquisition capability in 2020.
Okay, so that's more forward-looking.
Yeah, I mean, again, like they talked about the slowdown due to the impact of their ecology changes in H1, but that's it. But yeah, so I mean, it sits inside the wider online gaming portfolio. It's probably one of the larger brands in that portfolio. It makes up, I don't know, 13, 15%, something like that. It's a very wide portfolio with like a bunch of bingo brands and casino brands and stuff. And I think that grew 13%. So poker was slightly smaller than the group it sits within, but it's within the same bounds. So yeah, I guess they're fairly happy with that.
Well, 2020 is going to be With the COVID-19, it's going to be difficult to tell, but I would imagine that we should see an uptick in online poker traffic based on people staying home more, playing less live. That could reflect well in the financials. I believe that a lot of these live events are not huge money makers as far as revenue goes for the operators, and are there maybe to promote online. It will be interesting to see when the Q1 and Q2 numbers roll out, if there's been any correlated change that we could point to and say, hey, wow, this is a factor that happened because of the coronavirus.
Yeah, I'm not overly optimistic it's going to have like a material effect. I can't see there being a huge number of live poker or casino players who would switch to online poker specifically over a couple of months in summer where it's kind of quiet anyway for online play. Like, I could be wrong, if we all go under like house quarantine for the next 2 or 3 months, then sure. But outside those pretty extreme outcomes, I'd be surprised if we see a big impact. I would say, like, PokerStars did say in their financial results, like they talked about, what was the quote? Something about a big pipeline, deep pipeline of new product launches and marketing plans. They didn't say poker would return to growth in 2020. They said that will help poker business in 2020 and into 2021. So they were pretty modest in their expectations and projections. They said in the past their plan is every year to grow poker by small single percentage points.
Right.
That's notably less than, they're saying less than that this year. They said that they expect disruptions to continue into 2020. And then improve again in 2021. So that's probably, we know the Netherlands is not going to happen this year. Sweden still continue to be tough. There's anticipated headwinds in Spain and the UK now with stricter responsible gaming measures. So they're fairly measured about their expectation this year, but they did say they're going to continue investing in the product, continue trying to kind of get it on a stable footing and look towards kind of future growth next year. So Team Pokerfuse has just returned back from our trip to Las Vegas to attend the Global Poker Awards.
Yeah, it was quite an interesting trip, a great event. It's being billed as the second annual Global Poker Awards, which was a bit shocking for me, but I guess it is under that name. Previously, it was the American Poker Awards and the European Poker Awards. So they have combined, and this is the second annual one. Nick, you were up for an award, but it didn't exactly play out in your favor.
It's an absolute travesty. I'm shocked and saddened by my failure to take home the prize. It was given to a very worthy recipient, Joey Ingram, who was up for 4 awards. He scooped 2 of them, including Journalist of the Year. But I got a pretty nice shout out in his acceptance speech, so I guess I'll take that as a consolation prize.
You did get a very nice shout out in his acceptance speech. Thanks to Joey for that. And for listeners that may not be familiar with your dry sense of British humor, I believe that was tongue-in-cheek the way you were talking about being disappointed.
Yeah, it was. It was an interesting award because, and you very much got the vibe there. In my mind, I'm not sure if you'll agree with this, Mike, but it still has quite a focus on live events. So when you look at the awards, there's lots for the different poker tours, and there's a lot of the people in attendance, perhaps because it was in Las Vegas, were from that arena. And so there are some awards for things like Poker Journalist of the Year and like Industry Person of the Year in particular. And they're just such broad categories. So the 4 people up for Journalist of the Year, myself, Joey Ingram, we probably couldn't be further on the spectrum of what you would classify a poker journalist. You know, our output types of content are completely different, and the types of topics we talk on are completely different. And then there was Hayley Hintz, who does, you know, great work over at Flush Draw. Again, just a very different personality, I guess, in poker, and the kinds of things she writes about and the kind of detail she goes into. And then Lance Bradley, who's the editor at Pocket Fives. And again, perhaps a bit more focus on live, but they do some online stuff as well, a lot of focus in the US market. So the category is so broad, it was so difficult to, put a percentage chance on who was going to win it, because I think a lot of people there knew Joey, and very few people there knew me, or probably like Hayley Hintz, for example. And it was similarly with Industry Person of the Year. Like maybe Mike, you've got up there who was nominated, but I know like Phil Galfond was up there, and we both thought like he really had to win it, because who's done more in the industry than Phil? And then the person who won it was the Triton Poker guy.
Yeah, Paul Fua.
Yeah, but again, like, and I'm not saying he shouldn't have won. They're just, their contributions to the industry of poker are so different. One is online and one is live. One is super high stakes Asian focused poker tour. The other is a European online poker room. And I think even like Rob Young wasn't in that category.
Right. Yeah, he wasn't even nominated.
And again, whether you like the guy or not, his impact in the online poker sphere is so wide. So if there was perhaps one takeaway other than it was a great night. I think the production quality of the live stream was really good. I watched some after the fact. It was excellent. Some of these categories are just so broad, and they tried to cover so much that you're left with these really broad categories outside of perhaps the live poker ones, where they that gets really specific. Yeah. Like you've got like mid-major poker tour and things like that. The same doesn't apply to like perhaps the more online focused awards.
So yeah, I agree with you. The online sphere seems to be second fiddle in these awards. Hopefully we'll see some changes to that and some categories added, perhaps to reflect the importance of the online game and the poker industry overall. I wanted to ask you, what awards stood out to you, if any?
Wow, I can't remember. It's interesting. I was so focused on my award, which came as like the second last one. So I was sitting there for an hour and a half going, am I going to win? Am I going to win? And if I do, have I got a speech? Is it stupid that I've even got a speech? And all these things, and watching other people. The rest is mostly a blur, I'll be honest. So maybe you can take the lead on that.
Sure. Okay. So let's start with the two that were off the top and not really a surprise, and that's the GPI Female Player of the Year, Kristen Bicknell, for the third year running, takes down that event. That's just amazing. And the same with GPI Player of the Year, Alex Foxen, his second year in a row. I think those two really stand out. Because they are such achievements. It's pretty competitive out there, and to be able to do that 2 years running and 3 years running is quite the accomplishment.
Yeah, pretty incredible for a poker power couple. One to win it 4 years on the trot, 2 years on the trot is pretty staggering achievement.
Another award that stood out to me was Drew Amato, winning for, I believe it was Photograph of the Year.
Yeah, and that had to win. I mean, if that didn't win, I was going to flip the table and walk out. Like, it's such a good photo. It's the one where, I don't even know who it's a picture of. Do you know his name?
No, I don't even remember. I just remember the ace.
Yeah, discarding the aces. Like, it's such an amazing moment that were captured. The other pictures were good, but were mostly like set up photos, and this was like capturing a moment that otherwise wouldn't have been captured. So that was like, that had to win. So that was awesome.
Yeah. Others that stood out to me were Media Content of the Year, Written, which went to Martin Harris for his book, Poker and Pop Culture.
Yeah. Yeah. And that was another category where, again, like, you've got a book up against a news article, up against a mainstream news article, up against something else, where it's like, and you look at it, it's like, I don't know. I'm not sure if we talked about this on the podcast, the categories before, but I know me and you did, even when we were, on the panel voting for some of them. It's like, how do I compare a book, which probably took 18 months to write, to an article that probably took 6 hours to write? Like, it just seemed, and had the impact is so different and the reach is so different. And then maybe that's just the difficulty of, again, like, and I was saying this awards ceremony was a good length. I'm not saying it should have been 3 hours long and double the categories so that we can have best article and best book and that kind of thing. It's one of the struggles of when we have such a wide output of poker media content, being able to judge them distinctly.
Yeah. Streamer of the Year, Lex Veldhouse.
Yeah.
I believe that was 2 years running for him as well.
Yeah, could be.
Lex is killing it in that space, as is Andrew Nemi for Vlogger of the Year.
Yeah, that was that's an easy one there. I think that's definitely deserved.
Podcast of the Year. Let me get your thought on that. The Grid by Jennifer Shahadi.
So, I've only listened to one episode of that. I liked it. I think that it's a great concept for a podcast. So if people hadn't listened, I think the idea is that of all the 169 two-card combinations in Hold'em, she plans to do an episode on each and find someone who's got a story about it. I think I say 169, so that's like the offsuit King 5 as well as the suited King 5. I'm actually not sure if it is that, like if it's that specific or even more specific, like King 5 of clubs or what. But yeah, so that's what she's doing. And I think probably it won because people heard that as a concept and thought that's different and that's cool. I mean, like, I don't know, it's such stiff competition. Again, travesty that we didn't even make the shortlist. What on earth is that all about? But like, again, like the chip race won it last year and they didn't even make the shortlist this year. And they're doing exactly the same great stuff as they did. If anything, I think it's improved, as most would, as the same two people do it consistently. They've had some great guests on there. And that didn't even make it. And I think it's testament to the competitiveness in this category. There's just so many people putting out great audio content now. One
category that stood out to me, People's Choice for Hand of the Year, which was won by WSOP main event champion Ryan Reese. The thing that stood out to me about that category is when presenting the nominees, I really would have liked to have seen the hands. I understand it's an award show and they're limited on time, but it's certainly there's a bit of suspense that goes along with how these hands play out. And some of them, could have been, taken 10 minutes to play the entire hand out. It left me in the audience going, ooh, I want to see that again. I want to see it again. But I guess that's not always something that you can do in a live award show like that.
And I didn't vote on this criteria and I'm not really that familiar with it, but was it requisite that they were all captured on live TV? On TV, or could it have just been like a crazy hand played online for $1 million or something?
Yeah, I don't know off the top of my head. I would imagine that any recorded, whether written or televised documentation of the hand would be enough for it to qualify. But I don't know for sure.
In which case, like maybe the hand that won, there's just a Poker News live chip reporting thing of it, and there is not like a live hand to rewatch.
Well, it was the EPT Monte Carlo final table. So
that probably
yeah, that's likely to have been live streamed. One award that was given out for the first time this year was Poker Icon Award. And Yeah, that went to Johnny Chan, and when we were there, Sam's like, "Is that Johnny Chan over there?" And me and Nick look at each other and go, "Why would he be here?" We were unaware that they were giving out this award for the first time, but sure enough, it was Johnny Chan, and it was quite interesting to see him there and to see him interacting with today's poker industry, if you will. It was good. I think it's a good move to try and go back and award some of the legendary names in the game.
Yeah, I think that was definitely the highlight of the award show, watching it live. I think that was a very well prepared segment. A couple of nice introductory speeches talking about his life, and then he himself gave a a fun speech at the end. So, and it's also the one that I really remember because it was the one award after the one that I was up for. So at that point, I could relax, unbutton.
Stress was off.
Yeah, unbutton the waistcoat and enjoy like the last 5 minutes of the show. So, that was cool.
It really would have been nice to have Eric Seidel present that award to Johnny Chan, I thought, but I can understand why that might not have happened.
Yeah.
Anyway, overall, great event. Happy to see it. Definitely, some room for improvement and expansion, perhaps. And going into 2020, it'll be interesting to see if we could at least get a nomination this year, huh?
For the podcast.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're shooting for that.
Shooting for that and get you over the top for Journalist of the Year.
Okay, it's on.
Well, that wraps up this episode of the Pokerfuse podcast. As a reminder, please give us a like and a subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. And you can also follow us and interact with us on Twitter. Nick is at PokerProJones. I'm at SpookyBugs. Thanks, everyone, for tuning in.